I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission special meeting for June 25th. I'll ask the clerk to call roll.
Hogan,
Here.
Patrick,
Here.
Clark,
Here.
Gunn, Boucher,
Here.
Campbell,
Here.
me.
Here. The agenda, obviously, we put out, had the approval of minutes, but that really doesn't relate to this meeting. We will kind of move on. Do we still do public comments?
It's, yeah,
So we'll open up for public comments. If anyone is online, as we have no one additional in the room, please just raise your hand or notify us if you have any comments in relation to the agenda today for the special meeting, which is focused on the master plan.
Steve, do you want to approve the agenda?
Oh, did I skip that? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Back up. I wasn't expecting these to be part of the special meeting side. Does anyone have a chance to read?
Motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting.
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, seeing none, and then as I said, approval of minutes will be skipped until our regular meeting for the month of July. Now it moves to that public comments. Did we have anyone in the waiting room?
We go.
So then that would, so we have no public comments at this time, which would then move us on to the old business, which is what we're here to convene on, which is to continue discussion on the city of Southampton master plan 2026. I believe in our, one of the things we talked about was the packet that went out. We had the questions that we did not cover from last week's planning commission meeting that we wanted to be able to go over. But we also wanted to start to kind of talk about, what is kind of the scope and priorities. We obviously, David didn't have time to put it in our packet. So in front of you, each of us now have, I know he just got it. There's a memo that Dave's going to put together, kind of a meeting objectives and formal steps. And Luke, do you have something you want to add, or should I just turn it over to Dave and let him kind of walk us through?
We'll turn it over to Dave. I think the addendum which he provided is great. Me and him had a conversation earlier, not earlier today, but earlier in general about sort of meeting objectives, what honesty, or what we're hoping to get out of today. And that was the 5 things that were listed at the top of the addendum. So yeah, I will turn it over to Dave, who's here in person, which always is nice.
Thanks for being here, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
Well, yeah, as Luke and I were speaking about the master plan and the objectives for today. Came up with a couple of potential objectives. I know we had talked about discussing the survey questions as well as the general scope and priorities of the master planning process at the last meeting. So the objectives we thought for today we could cover would be first just to provide just a general overview of the formal steps of the master planning process. So that's really just kind of just walking through the steps of the Planning Enabling Act. Those are set in stone. We have to follow that process. The second objective to provide overview of the general suggested scope and timeline and adjust as necessary. So I put together kind of a 3-phase type approach that most consultants use for master planning. And then within that, there's some subtasks and options that we can discuss. But I wanted to kind of walk through the steps in the process where we have the formal steps from state statute. We have what we actually do to accomplish that. The planning process and prepare the document is the project scope itself. Then number 3 would be to discuss general priorities and areas of focus. So that's where I want to hear, what did you like from the Tri-Communities plan? What did you appreciate from Douglas's plan? What are the hot buttons, the key issues that you really want to cover in this planning process to make this effort a success? Then number 4 would be to provide community survey feedback. I figured we could do that one sort of after the first couple, just so we can walk through the processes and scopes, and then spend more time on that survey effort and really walk through the questions. Again, as stated last time, these questions are not the final way. We have to ask all of them. They're just, it's a broad, very comprehensive list of questions. I know there's things that can be struck. I know there's things that need to be added, and there's different ways we can ask questions. So that's was the purpose of the original memo, was just to be a discussion document so that we can get survey rights and have something available. And then with that, we'd have to determine, when is our secondary review. So we'll talk about it today. Will we jump right back into this in our next regular meeting? And then what would be the target implementation date of the survey itself? And then lastly, just to talk about future meeting dates, I think last time we had generally talked about the week after each regular meeting, but just want to make sure that I'm on the same page on meeting dates, and if we're doing one per month or you're trying to get things in a regular meeting, so. Any issues with the suggested for the day?
No.
To cover what you were thinking from the last meeting?
Definitely, because I think that's one of the things we want to try to do is just get this overall scope. Then take a look at questions, but then start to look at what's it going to take to get it done.
Well, and so this memo, this is really just the notes I prepared for the meeting, so I'm just gonna walk through this slowly so that you can follow along and take notes and make comments as necessary. So the first would be that number, the first objective would be the formal steps of the process. And as mentioned, these are all outlined in the Michigan Planning Enabling Act. The first thing we really need to do before we get too much further is send out the what we call intent to plan letters to all of our adjacent jurisdictions, public utilities, county, various other groups. So there's a laundry list of folks and agencies that we need to keep informed of our planning process and invite them to participate. So what we do is tell them that all of our project information is going to be online in this location. When we have drafts available, they'll be posted here. And then we would keep those agencies informed at key steps of the process per the act. So typically we don't get a lot of feedback based on outside agency information letter, but every now and then we do. But it is just a step in the process. The formal step number 2, that's just a planning process. In 90% of the project lives there. So that's what we really need to work out in the scope, which is on the following pages, but really the planning process, in terms of how we prepare the documents, what types of meetings we have, public involvement, what we're studying. Some of that's generally covered, the content in the statute, but the way we get there and the way we develop the plan, the meetings we have, the workshops, public involvement, that's really for us to determine. And that will be outlined in the general suggestions project scope. So from there, we develop a formal plan. When the planning commission is comfortable with the plan, you would have to request that the city council distribute it to those same agencies that I referenced earlier. That's done by a resolution. At the same time, the city council, it's kind of an interesting thing in the act, but the city council has to assert their rights for final approval of the master plan. So by a resolution, they will authorize the distribution. So you'll say as a planning commission, we're comfortable with this document. The city council has to be comfortable too. At the same time, they'll assert their right to give the final approval. Because otherwise the planning commission by state law could actually give the final approval of the master plan, but that's pretty rare. Usually it's advisory in the city council makes the final decision. So once that happens, there's either a 42 or 63 day review period. 42 is if you're updating a plan, 63 is if it's a new master plan. I have a feeling based on the extent of what we're going to do and pulling this out as a city plan, we should probably just call a new master plan. There's really nothing in the statute that outlines the threshold between an update and a rewrite. I've done some pretty significant updates that we've just done the 42-day process. But to be safe and to avoid future challenge, we may just want to do the 63-day because it's basically going to be a new plan, which again, we're going to take a lot of priorities and information from the existing plan, but it will be a new document. Then we have a public hearing, obviously 15 days notice. And that has to happen after the 42 to 63 day review ends. Planning commission approves and recommends final approval of the plan. So it's interesting, the act also says that you approve it, but then you have to recommend final approval. And then the city council takes final action, and then we have to send out notification letters to those same agencies again. So those are the steps. Again, I think we talked about that a couple months ago, but as we consider the scope, we always need to make sure that all of these steps are crossed off the list, and those are released. So any questions on what we're required to do for the planning enablement?
Before we move on, one of the questions that I do have, because you've worked with this, many of us, it's the first time that we've been involved. Bobby has had experience previously. I did talk to a couple of the communities here in Michigan that did master plans in the last 3 to 5 years. And some of them handled it exclusively with their consultant and just their planning commission. A couple of cities, they actually formed special like task force or like a special committee that focused on the master plan, and they had a number of the planning commission members on it. They had other commissions, like say for us, the historic commission, they had some people from, they had a city council representative, they had public works, parks, and they were all part of the commission, and they took it as their responsibility to develop the master plan. And then they brought it to the planning commission in their monthly meetings. Have you ever experienced that? Is there pros and cons to it?
I think it depends on the jurisdiction, really the nature of the planning commission itself, and who's willing and able to really put the work in. I think for this size of community and this planning commission, I think we could probably have the planning commission manage the whole project. But I think you bring up a good point, which made me think about as we go into specific chapters of the master plan. We'll get into the phase 2 of the scope. We'll be looking at facilitating discussions on major topic areas / chapters. So we may want to break off into smaller committee groups. So maybe there's 2 of you on each committee. Maybe there's one tourism and economic development group. Maybe there's a land use group, transportation, mobility, natural resources. And so we could possibly break out into smaller groups, and then even those groups could pull in outside representatives as well. So we can talk about that, or we can have those all at this, at this level, and then invite folks in as we need.
Because that's what I'm wondering, like, if we keep it at this level, and I want everybody's opinion on this, we'll go around and give you a chance to kind of think about it, because again, I don't want to dictate that, hey, this is all going to be the planning commission, and walk out and have 3 or 4 people on the planning commission saying, hey, that's a lot of work. So I want to make sure we're all kind of on board if we're going to keep it underneath our control and jurisdiction, and also discuss what the plus and minuses are. The one thing that I am curious of, since we run this as like a special meeting, we only allow this 3-minute. If we bring in a special guest, like let's say we wanted to have somebody from the convention bureau, the Convention and Tourist Bureau, and they wanted to be part of the meeting, can we make them part of that meeting to where they can actively involve with us versus their 3 minutes that they can speak? Absolutely. So we can always have a special guest, or we can invite somebody else into the meeting at any workshop or planning commission meeting. Okay. Because I think that's something that, even Bobby had brought up on last week, is that we really do want to make certain that we're bringing other people into the process. And I don't want it to come across like, well, it's just the 7 of us that are only doing this, and every meeting's closed, and they get 3 minutes only to make a comment. And that's where I was wondering if we had this idea of, like we did with the task force, where you have a separate commission that's made up of the community. The negative, of course, is we've all been through the whole master planning. We kind of understand what it is. And you throw somebody in from, parks, they might not have any idea really what we're trying to achieve. So I think their input's good, but I don't know if they can really run a commission or a committee.
And something like a steering committee would be, incredibly useful when it's like the tri-community. You want representatives from each community, but having the planning commission be part of this process, and I think that would be pretty typical to see. You guys are the ones who are involved in every other aspect of planning for the community, so I don't think it would be exclusionary in any way for this commission to, and you still take input, like you say, have guest speakers and things like that. But yeah, just
Any thoughts from anybody else?
Yeah, I would not support creating a task force, but we could certainly do study groups, which is what's been done. PPW, for example, on Park Street, a couple of people to collect information. Like we could create, assign 1 or 2 people to talk to Cal Lake about water capacity is, how that would affect future growth, et cetera. So that's how I would want to approach it.
Anyone else?
I agree, great.
Agree? Great. Agree with full-heartedly, just want to make certain we put it out there so that everyone has an opportunity to know that it was discussed.
I think the planning commission is fully capable of handling this. I was involved tangentially with an initial drafting of a master plan and a revision of a master plan in the community I lived in before. And it was completely handled by the planning commission and then approved by the city commission, and it seemed to happen. It was a city of 2,500 people. So it seemed to work just fine.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea too, even if we had smaller research groups or one or two people that are could run down information on a certain topic, that we could probably figure that out as we go through the process, divide up conquer tasks. I mean, otherwise it's on us, but if we certainly could use the expertise in your context if we're running down information. So I think there's opportunities for that as well, but bring it all back here to the commission level for discussion.
And I'm assuming when you send out the letters like, to all the the agencies and the jurisdictions, we also encourage that if they would like to, be involved in any way through workshops or specials, groups, that they would, let us know and we could actually, add them in, where it's appropriate.
Yes, I think that's a great idea.
I've seen a couple, and they usually suggest that you could submit any kind of comments via email, or obviously it will have the notices for when it's going to be the
Right.
be able to talk as well.
Okay.
And I think with the state required letter, it's kind of a boilerplate. We love to be involved. We'll keep you updated, but in the scope, I'm suggesting that in the phase 1, number 4, public input process. We talked about in the past, open house event, drop-in displays, pop-up. And what I also like to do is under D&E, interviews and special topic roundtable discussions. So the interviews could be, we could even offer the opportunity in those agency letters to say, hey, if you'd like to talk one-on-one, let's set something up. We could be a little bit more proactive to get them at the table, or at least make a call and have them to give their comments on the issues in the area. The special topic roundtable discussions, that's something typically that through the survey, and we may want to add a question at the end of the survey, are you willing to participate in a special topic study, give a list of things that we might further investigate? And then we'd have those names, we pull together groups, maybe 10 people at a time. In those types of small group discussions, usually the planning commission would not be involved. We may have one planning commission member be there, but it's more of like a kind of a citizens input roundtable. And it kind of depends on the community too. Sometimes we said we don't want the planning commission members because there could be a very politically charged environment, and folks want to be able to speak freely. But in other communities, it's really no issue. So maybe we can talk that as it rises. So with the small group discussions too, maybe that's divided up by interest areas. As we talked about before, if we have like two people researching a certain issue, those two people could be involved in the roundtable discussion. And that's an additional opportunity to get that expertise from people who are really interested in wanting to be a part of this. And then also we can put together a list of names of 10 or 20 people that all call directly, do a one-on-one interview, or Luke and I can meet with them here, so that there's opportunities to kind of more one-on-one type interviews as well for those people that you really think that need to be, have some face time with us. So.
Right, perfect.
Okay, so we're kind of going a little bit between the state required steps and the scope. So I'm maybe just touch on the 3 phase approach in the suggested scope, and obviously this can change, but I've written a lot of proposals and I've reviewed a lot of proposals for master plans, and they're usually a 3-phase scope. So there's not a lot of variation. It's kind of, everyone has a model that they generally stick to, and these are the basic steps in the process to creating plans itself. So phase one, as I said before, legal notices, distribution, finalize scope, timeframes, milestones, expectations. So that's somewhat what we're doing now. And I think we'll you know, truly finalize the scope at a future meeting. The community survey, which we're gonna get into this evening as well. So the development of that and then implementation. Public input process, development, implementation, including but not limited to, and an open house event. So I mentioned this in the last couple of months, that it'd be really, it's very helpful to have something, an event early on in the process to where you're not saying, hey, this is what we're gonna do, but this is a blank canvas. What are your thoughts? So it's almost like a continuation of the survey, but in person, and allows people to also mark up a map or stick Post-its on a map, go through exercises. I just did a master plan open house like this 2-3 weeks ago. We had 120 people show up. The room was about twice as big as this, and it was packed. But we had 7 stations, and I had one planning commission member at every station, and they just jumped in, and all I had to do was kind of direct the show, and it was amazing. I've never had it work that great, and maybe that's a goal for us here, but
Exactly.
none of them were shy, and they all asked questions, and they got people talking. They each had their individual exercise, and we had a land use station, we had, it was more of a rural community, so we had farmland preservation station, natural resources, growth and development housing. So it was great. We got a lot of good comments, and I think it was a really, it was good just to have that out there, that tell people that we've started this process. If you haven't seen the survey, take it, and it's really kind of a show of goodwill too, that we're having this, we're listening before we're writing anything. So it's kind of a good for PR for the entire project as well.
Does that normally happen when the survey's out or after the survey's been completed?
I like to do, but worry about that, having survey live at that
Survey
time.
live time.
So that's folks can, if they haven't taken the survey and they attend the meeting, we give them the QR code on the way out, and so to make sure they take the survey. So
Okay.
I think both those are kind of happening simultaneously. The survey should be out before the open house, and then be available for a couple of weeks after.
I guess at the risk of not being argumentative, but just kind of challenging that. In your experience, what's the likelihood though, that when you have a community come in, what's the possibility that what we hear from them is going to change what we want to put on the survey? I know we want to get it out, and
I've never had it. I've had a pretty good record with this, and I think as you finalize the survey questions, you may be able to anticipate some of the issues that would come up in the open house as well. So I think we'd be okay. But I also don't have an issue with us doing any follow-up surveys as well. We may have something later on. Maybe it's more detailed, or I think was mentioned at the last meeting that we had surveys specific to certain groups on special topics. So we could do a number of surveys, but we would have one general overall kickoff survey, which is the one that we'll discuss today.
I do, there's a good representation of the community in here. We all have kind of our outreach and the people we're talking to, and we're all hearing different things. But I just wanted to make sure that there was a venue or a mechanism for capturing, if we do hear things, right, trying to solicit other input from the community. So if that means another follow-on survey or something, or even bringing it up on a second town hall, or whatever, that's fine.
And we should always leave some open-ended questions for the end of the survey. So if for some reason we didn't cover anything and something's on someone's mind, they can type it in. And so we always have that.
Correct.
Some people maybe just type a word, others will type a paragraph of information. So it's some people really take advantage of that open-ended opportunities.
Anything else?
So.
Yeah, I meant anything else in the survey. Very good.
So phase one, step 4, so we open house event, drop-in display. So even some of the boards that we have during open house, we could leave here at City Hall. So as people are here to pay their bills or get information, they could walk through the room and participate in the exercises, kind of a self-guided exercise. So we can we can leave the drop-in displays. We could do, pop-ups, like we're doing for the waterfront preservation project, so if there was any willingness to staff a table during any of the events, or just, I think, didn't we have someone outside of City Hall at that?
We did City Hall, we did the post office, we did the music in the park. And one of the parades. Farmers Market. Yeah, I think it was, we had 6 or 7 different ones that people kind of, took the board and had them out, and we had the different colors for if they were a resident, if they were a visitor.
And that may be something where we just have one overview board and maybe there's an exercise, but that could be, maybe the intent of that is just to have a meet and greet and information, project information, and direct folks to the survey. Direct folks to opportunities, for the other open house. And to, kind of give the schedule, and, I assume we'd have a master plan landing page on the website, so we can direct everybody there. I think it would be helpful to have any memo that we post to the planning commission. Those could all be on that site as well, so we have all master plan specific documents, reports, studies, maps on a master plan landing page. So that would be helpful to have that available at the time of the if there's a pop-up station.
I'm assuming we could have a QR code for the survey, correct?
Yeah.
Now, we have a book, and Sarah, there's a bulletin board inside. Do we have any public outdoor bulletin space? Like if you wanted to have keep a QR code, like in the information booth or someplace that if people, if they just wanted to see the survey, they could just kind of grab the. And then it gets back to how do we control the service? Yeah. So these are ideas we could possibly.
We could also do like an 11 by 17 small poster to the businesses could post on their windows, and that can have just the open house dates, survey, QR code, and just the website for the landing page. So I think that we could definitely do something where we hand out a stack of flyers to local businesses, have one over here.
The CVB just updated that rather large sign down by the old drugstore. I think they
Oh, that's true.
potentially, if we ask
Yeah.
nice enough, they may accommodate us and yeah, have a, like you said, QR code or some kind of link to,
Okay.
something we can ask.
Okay, anything else on public input? Then we get into, in the first phase, the assessment and assessment of data conditions. So a lot of this is behind the scenes working away. So we'll do some touring, study aerials, really study the physical conditions. I like to do what I call a character analysis of especially when you have a small geography like this. You can really do kind of neighborhood by neighborhood analysis. And you generally talk about the land use, whether or not it's walkable, the lot size, the types of buildings and uses. And really that helps to influence the future land use map, which that would be more specific to the very specific to the city rather than generalized in the current tri-communities plan. So we'll really understand, I actually find that more valuable than doing an existing land use map. Because existing land use map, we just usually base that on assessors data as well as just kind of spot checking that as we can. But a character map really gives you more, it allows you to see the common characteristics of a different neighborhood. So I like to do a character analysis map and description of neighborhoods. We would do a housing assessment, so that there's a new requirement in the act that we have to study housing conditions and housing supply and have recommendations concerning housing. Obviously, we'll do demographics and do comparisons over the years, population, housing, economic data. Here are a number of base maps from the plan. So a lot of this goes on behind the scenes that would end up being provided to you in a report form toward the end of phase 1. And then 6 would be to analyze and summarize community survey data, open house feedback, and prepare a summary report. So after it's all said and done, we have these events, we have our survey. I like to just kind of put that all into one document, one report, so we can say, what did we hear? This was a big effort this summer. What did we hear? What are the common themes? Where did this effort, where did this public input lead us in our thoughts and priorities?
not to go back, but just one quick question on surveys. To what extent can we or should we look at surveys that we did recently, like on the waterfront, for example? That was a very detailed survey that you guys did, and it would, I mean, to me, it's fresh enough that that should be pulled in rather than reinvent the wheel, but just something to throw out. I'm sure we've had surveys on strategic planning priorities for the last few years. So to me, those should be in the bucket of information, but again, just more of a comment, I guess, than a question, but.
I think it's all fair game. I know for waterfront survey, we did get very specific, very issue oriented based, and we really drilled down on design, heights, bulk scale. We had the visual preference survey as well. So we certainly could think about how to, I mean, I think everything's fair game at this point.
Okay.
And just like I mentioned earlier, the last meeting, the beginning of the survey starts the same way in terms of are you a part-time, full-time resident? Where do you live? If you're not a resident, where do you live? And so we can also kick off the survey the same way. I think the short-term rental survey also started in similar.
It did, yeah.
And then if you like, it was mentioned last meeting, we could require, if you like, name and address. That might discourage some of the survey fraud that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I haven't come across any, in my experience, that happening that often. It always comes up as a concern, but I've never had anything, any projects really swayed by a group that has stacked the deck. I mean, you may have here. I know. I'm sure there's been a lot of efforts in over the past few years, so I know it can happen. But if you'd like to do something with name and address, we could certainly make that a mandatory question in the survey as well.
And whether we include it as mandatory or optional is obviously up to you as well. But then if we do include it as optional, you know, I think me and Dave spoke earlier about how we would really use that information any differently, whether you included your name and address or not.
Correct.
You know, how is it something we're going to go through and we're going to take that, you know, if you've stood by it, if you put your name by it, are we going to take it a little bit more seriously? But also, how are we going to do that? How are we going to wade through that information differently than if you didn't include a name? So
Yeah.
Does that become public information at that time, or?
It would be.
Yes,
Yeah.
should be.
Well, and thinking about it, when riffing off of you saying what value is that, maybe have also another option of something to think about is name withheld at request, like give the address so that we have at least the information of, okay, nobody's responding from Maple Street, everybody's responding from on the hill, nobody's, you know, so that we get an idea of where people in town are responding, what they're thinking about, and have the option of name withheld at request or I don't know, as another option.
We do have a survey question where they identify where they live in the city.
We had the general areas of the city. I think we had a.
Now, the one thing that I don't want to jump on, when we get to the questions, I'll raise those couple suggestions on that.
I'd just like to suggest also that as you were talking about how we interpret the survey results, et cetera. I work with cleaners and definitely need that kind of input, but also like input that is what I would typically describe shorthand wise as sort of marketing input in terms of how we interpret results. Because, and of course, this will be driven by questions too, but at the end of the day, I think what we're trying to figure out, and you mentioned the word character, David, and I couldn't agree with you more, in terms of what is the character of the city that basically differentiates us from other cities and continues to pull people here to play, work, and live, more so than other places. At the end of the day, I mean, if I were a city council member or a leader in the city, that's what I would want to know, because that's then what we do relative to how we ordinance, how we zone, what we value. As I was going back and looking at Douglas and I was reading the tri-community plan from the last time, I mean, there are these words that tend to be a bit nebulous, like character. And the tri-community plan spent a fair amount of time talking about rural character. And it just struck me as, you know, we have to be really thoughtful and in understanding what it is we're trying to solve for. And what it is that will make people continue to want to come here to the city of Saugatuck and all that it entails. For instance, you know, while the city certainly has, I mean, everything to do with that, part of the city, at least from I think people's points of view, are the river, water, sand dunes, beaches. So I just want to make sure that as you're constructing, thinking about the survey, and we're thinking about what it is we ultimately want to understand in order to do good planning, that we're constructing those questions and getting that kind of information. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, and then,
Phase two.
then into phase two, so I do think, the first phase will take about 3 months. That is hugely amount of time to plan all the events, get the survey live, have it available for, I'd say about a month at least. And then, to be able to put together the summary reports and talk about it. And then that would move right into phase two, which is our work sessions and drafting. So this is where a lot of the work is done. This is where we are working as a group to deliberate on various topics and chapters of the plan. I would estimate that would take about 4 months. So at this point, we would talk about, probably early on, we talk about the master plan outline and content. So a basic outline of a master plan, this could be a list of potential chapters here, just an example. You'd have an introduction, vision, existing conditions, needs assessment, demographic analysis, summary of public involvement, topic area chapters. So that could be, your mobility, your natural resources, so on. Future land use is probably going to be its own chapter with the future land use map. A zoning plan really it falls under that. A zoning plan is specifically the future land use categories corresponding to your zoning districts. So it can be a 1-to-1 ratio. It might be sometimes it could be 1 and 2. You don't want it to be the future land use map to be so broad that it doesn't provide you any guidance. So we wanted to be able to say, hey, this is your future land use category. It corresponds with this residential zoning district. So then we move on to implementation. So I think the implementation strategy chapter is important. So we're going to itemize some specific actions that we want to accomplish over the next 5 or so years. And so that could be changes the zoning ordinance. It could be a special area study. It could be a partnership or an effort. But those are things that we actually want to accomplish. And with that, we want to identify responsible parties. Mostly it's going to be us, but also who we might partner with on certain efforts. We want to prioritize them and put timeframes on them and make this a kind of a work plan so that every year during your goal setting for the year, you could pull up a master plan implementation table and see where are we at this year. We've accomplished these 2. Let's move on to actions 3 and 4 this year and generally follow the priorities that are in the master plan. Now that we can certainly, after master plan is adopted, that task list, that's going to evolve, priorities may change, we may shift things around, but that's going to be the general framework for what we want to accomplish for the next couple of years. So a master plan is going to be task oriented with actions listed, but it's also going to be policy oriented. It's where we'll have principles and policies that would guide us in our decision making for land use applications or for in some instances capital improvements and other efforts.
Okay, question? The statute requires we do this every 10 years, is that correct?
It's a 5-year review. The section, it does not say how often you actually have to update it, but you have to review it every 5 years. And during that 5-year review, you determine if it's still reflecting the goals of the community, the perspectives of your residents. And then, if we had a specific 5-year plan of tasks and finish them up, we probably want to reopen the master plan again in 5 years.
So when I'm thinking about, the reason I'm asking is, I'm trying to think of what time, how far out I'm thinking about for our master plan, and you're saying 5 years, not 10 years.
I think it can be, once you start getting over 5 years, they start to, they probably aren't that important, or they might not need the highest of priorities. So in terms of actions, I think it's usually 5 years.
Okay.
But the whole plan and the policies and future land use, you're putting on a 20-year, 30-year hat at that point. But the things that you actually want to do are shorter time frame than that.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And so, again, so at about that time, we probably generally map out what the master plan is going to look like in terms of the chapters and the outline and what's in it. And then we go into our facilitative discussions on those major topic areas and chapters. So I expect we have goals, principles, and recommendations for each of those, let's just say 5 or 6, 7 chapters. And again, that's where we could possibly assign responsibilities to 1 or 2 members on certain items, or pull in other experts or individuals to attend our meetings. And so I could see us having 4 or 5 meetings on specific areas of the plan, and then future land use and implementation as well. So that would be multiple meetings over 4 months. And again, if it's too aggressive, we can always adjust that schedule. But I think this is kind of an 11-month time frame, which usually is pretty reasonable. Allows us to get the job done, but also it keeps us on track.
I'm sorry, another question, maybe for Luke or Sarah. Are we bound by the formalities of this agenda when we are doing workshops? And for example, under facilitating discussions, maybe topics, if we have the public here and we're talking about overall goals for a master plan, is the only public input allowed at items 4 and 9, or if we were talking about a specific goal, can we amend that so members of the public can come up on that particular item and say, I like this goal, I don't like this goal?
So I spoke to Jake about this, and he suggested that, and that was specific to this meeting, that we just followed the agenda schedule and the Open Meetings Act and all that stuff. I can look at the bylaws, but I'm sure that we can allow for more time or more public input. I mean, frankly, you guys can ask for public input on any agenda topic. It doesn't necessarily have to be a public hearing.
I wondered if this was in the charter. That's what I was confused by.
Okay.
If this format is in the charter.
No, we do.
I'm sorry?
I think when we do open houses, we're allowed to do that.
Oh, sure. But anyway, so and maybe people don't want to have the public jumping up at every stitch and saying something, but,
Actually, it's a fairly efficient idea.
I'm sorry?
I think it's a fairly efficient idea. I mean, if we're talking about something and would like whoever's sitting in the audience, what do you think about that? Or if we notice a meeting that's going to address certain subjects, people show up. It'd be nice if they could participate in the discussion.
I think if you're breaking it into these like chapter discussions where you've got smaller groups, so it's intimate, because if we don't have the majority of us meeting, then it's not an official
Right.
meeting. So then you actually can just have it more as a quote unquote group discussion as opposed to a special meeting or a workshop.
You get real-time feedback on
Yeah.
those issues too, so.
But you do have to be careful, because I just keep flipping back to like the short-term task force. If you would have allowed input from people who were here at every meeting and everything we were discussing, we never got to.
Well,
But that was much more controversial than what a master plan typically is.
and that's when we were thankful that public comment was limited to 3 minutes.
Exactly. But, so it's got pluses and minuses.
I think the special guest plan is the way you're gonna
Yeah,
get them, the people that are engaged, and say, okay, you come and give us your spiel on it.
But even then,
So
That's limited to them getting their spiel, sitting down, boom, move on versus.
Oh, I think there'd be interaction opportunity, but no? I think of the, yeah, but that's what
I
I would think.
envision like if we were talking about parks and the parks, if you had somebody from the parks
Yeah,
rec group, we would incorporate them as a special guest for the entire meeting. They would be as active in this conversation as we are. That's how I envision it, as a special guest.
well.
So the order of business is outlined in our bylaws, but I can definitely clarify some of this with Jake to make sure they're comfortable with anything. Again, I think with any agenda topic, you can almost always ask for public comment, whether it's required or not. So,
I don't think it's public comment as much as it is being able to interact.
right, yeah, okay. I'll clarify that and
Yeah.
get that back with you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry.
We'll prepare drafts and then move on to that formal review and adopt process. Which we talked about before, which, just because of that 63-day review time and then public notice for hearing. That's gonna push us to probably 4 months at our meetings and
stand up.
planning commission and council and so on. One thing we may also want to address, I put it as 3.2. Optional public input process, development and implementation. So I almost copied that same process from the phase 1. So we could have another open house event later in the process to really actually have the boards up showing what we did, right? What we heard, what we did, why we did it. So we have a future land use map up. We have recommendations. We could do something where it's an open house. We surely do a formal presentation. So maybe it would be kind of a hybrid approach where like 5 o'clock it opens, people walk around and look at things, 6 o'clock, there's a 15-minute presentation. Maybe another presentation at 7, something like that, to where we can actually present to the public that's outside of the public hearing itself. So it's more, it would be more interactive, it's more of an opportunity for people to.
And wouldn't you have that between the draft 1 and draft 2 in the phase 2?
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Just push that to the point to, maybe that's in the end of phase 2 rather than the formal process.
So we
we're
actually
still
grab
kind
that
of
final.
Yeah,
And then I think once you issue the final one, if you want to do a community meeting where you do,
We present
we
it.
present it. I could see that, but at that point, once it's kind of final, we've already started to distribute it. I really don't want it to be more of an open. I don't want comments, but we're probably not gonna go back and change it and.
yep. Because we want, when we open that up for the agency review, we want it to be a pretty tight document at that.
Right.
So. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that's the general scope of most master planning processes in Michigan. So, and again, we can, if you feel like there's a general agreement on those as the main steps and milestones for the process.
Sure.
Yeah, that's be a minute.
And you read more than us.
And my thought was, I do want us to come to each meeting, thinking, what are we gonna do now, and what's the next step? And if we could at least just kind of map out our objectives over the next couple of months. At least we know, okay, phase 1 is 3 months, we're gonna try to accomplish this over the next 3 months, and we'll set those dates, set those objectives. And then do the same for phase 2, phase 3.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so then the next on the objective list is to just talk about priorities and areas of focus. And so I think this was kind of it comes out of our conversation about what did you appreciate and want to carry over from the tri communities plan? What did you like about the Douglas plan? What are the special areas that we needed to study here for our city specific plan? So what is going to make a successful plan? What is to make sure that we are covering all the main issues? And again, some of this might come out of our public survey and public involvement, but some of the things I jotted down here was, a strong public involvement plan, talking about housing and neighborhoods and community character, have a downtown area specific recommendations, economic development, tourism, city identity and branding. So I had some questions in the survey about the city logo and the city, does this represent the city and things about branding and identity? Complete streets and mobility, so, we're not just talking about cars getting from one place to another, but, by bike, by wheelchair, by foot. Environmental protection and resilience, community facilities, park services, tri-community regional issues, future land use implementation. So, I mean, those really kind of cover the broad issues. So the things I don't know if we need, if there are any special areas or special redevelopment sites or I know we're kind of set with what we have and we're mostly built out. We have, certain areas that are right during the waterfront plan. We talk about what areas are more right for redevelopment than others. But do you feel that we need to look at any special block of the city or any special issue or any special building? In the Douglas plan, I think they had one sub-area plan that was.
They just have so much more open. They've got 2 or 3 proposals for some major developments that are currently happening, so that was able to be incorporated a lot into things. And they have a lot more open land than what we do. Like right along Riley, one side's Douglas, other side's Finnville. So we don't have a lot of that. I think one of the things that we do have that no one else has is the Oval Beach. And, so it's almost like, to me, that's not only a major focus, but has to factor in as something that's more specialized to just the city, which you wouldn't have in some of the others.
I mean, to me, I think there's a few issues that would be good to have on the survey that are, for example, what would you like to do with the unconserved part of the airport property? Should it be a community garden, an athletic space? Leave it be for now. Do people think that it's a priority to reclaim the right of way on Park Street and create at least a shoulder for public safety or something more? And then even some of these, like when we say priority, is it a priority over other things, or is it a someday, or is it a why haven't you done it already? Bathrooms at Coughlin Park. I mean, I know these things have come up, but I think these are good targeted things to get input that might push. For example, should we use some of the cash reserve the city has that's pretty significant to advance some of these or not? I don't know, but those are just a couple examples off the top of my head.
Craig, you bring up a point that I had thought about, like that airport property. That's an investment by the city. It's not the city of Sagatuck proper. The land is not it's underneath the city of, or it's the township that actually zones it. So does a master plan normally touch upon land that's held for quote unquote investment? Because it's not under the city of Sagatuck's jurisdiction. We're the owner,
Well, we
but
own-
we own it, but that's no different than somebody who owns a piece of land. They're still subject to the zoning rules of the city of Sagatuck. We own the land, but we're subject to this township's
I
zoning.
think under the
rules.
context of, development of parks and open spaces, it's relevant. Whether or not it's inside the city boundaries, it's just my take on it. But
Okay.
I think of it as like the chapters we're talking about. I think infrastructure is a good one. I think our parks is a good one that's important. Sustainability and talking about the beach and some of those things. So at this point, I'm thinking big chapter type thoughts more than some of the details.
Yeah,
And I think parks should be there, and I think the airport should be part of that park section.
For sure. In fact, just our parks generally.
Yeah, the parks overall, so
Yeah, that should be a chapter.
it is a chapter.
Mhm.
I think it's going in there.
Although there is a tri-community parks plan that everyone puts together where they've done a ton of work on that too. So not to reinvent that wheel, and that just came out last year, I think. So
Correct. And I think if I'm not mistaken, well, the Douglas one made reference to it and actually
Mhm.
incorporated that as an appendix, so we can do the similar type of
Mhm.
thing.
Okay.
But they did in their plan, which I think we want to do, is they did list all the parks that are within their jurisdiction. And had, rankings and discussions on, the viability of each of those parks. And that's part of the plan, but we could also then narrow it down to more specific for the city of Sagatuck on the ones that fall within.
I think CJ brought up a, you know, it's kind of where my head was going, right, kind of as we looking at these kind of major things, right, and, decompose them a little bit, to try and pull information out, right, especially when we get into the survey. And, as I kind of look through both the priorities, areas of focus, as well as, the initial kind of, it was just a first run at some typical survey outline, and then I went back and read our tri-community master plan, right? Our overarching goal is, to improve quality of life for all citizens, blah, blah, blah. We get into community character and what have you, if I'm jumping ahead too far, here, let me know, but, part of me wants to figure out how to pull out of, the community. Do they feel that their quality of life has improved? So kind of a rear look, as we're asking questions, there's a rear view look, right, that says, when we put the tri-community plan together, our overall goal is to improve quality of life. Has it improved, right? And do you see it improving? I think somehow getting some contextual questions around that would be important. I don't know how you guys feel, but
That's interesting. This, for the people who have been here, who are like full-time residents, have been here for a while.
I like that. Under priorities and areas of focus, I wonder also if, and I was just talking to someone this afternoon, as a matter of fact, promoting the uniqueness of Saugatuck, and that came up a lot under the short-term rental discussion. And also, promoting our community diversity. I think both of those, the last census is like 99% white residents. And of course, promoting LGBTQ in terms of diversity. The person actually said, keep Saugatuck weird. And I think and he also said, the usual canard of, oh, we don't need just t-shirt shops and fudge shops. So I think one of the beautiful things about Saugatuck is that I'm always pleasantly surprised the number of people who shop in this town as their vacation. And the shops we currently have and have had are unique from other cities, from larger cities, from going to a mall, from shopping online. I think that's an aspect that needs to be addressed. And I think also if we're able to, whether it's through the housing stock or whatever, if we can promote diversity in this community, I think that would be a worthy goal for our community going forward. So under priorities and areas of focus, I think promoting the continued uniqueness of our community. And that even plays in with the water that we have available to us, as Bobby was saying. But what makes us different than even Douglas? What certainly makes us different than the township? That we have a main street, that we have a consolidated, vibrant shopping district. So anyway, I would like to see those two included.
For at least the former part of what you were talking about.
I'm sorry?
For at least what you're talking about, the first part of it. I do think what we captured a lot in the last tri-community master plan was community character. And I think it'd be good to have that as a specific area of focus. And I think that does touch on the branding identity, and that also touches on land use. Because a big thing in our tri-community master plan that we had was preservation of structures. And what we're seeing now is structures getting torn down, rebuilt up. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but just something we can look at and kind of try and get checks on for what people are liking and what makes us, us.
And art,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's two of the chapters, character and then the economic viability is one of the two that I heard, because there's a lot of, and that character goes lots of different ways.
Yeah, I think you can just.
Right.
yeah, I think that's exactly where I was going to.
How do we set those chapters? So can we agree to what those chapters are?
basically, yeah. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about as I was reading all of that is that it's really, I mean, the city itself this Butler Street and the other streets of the city. It contrasts with the character or the feeling, not really character, but really feeling of the neighborhoods. I mean, the neighborhoods, you're talking about, character in sort of the historical sense. And the way the town has evolved through smart planning, I would like to think, in terms of what it offers, not only our visitors, but also people who live here. There's a vibrancy in the city that enlivens the historical character of the neighborhoods. And I do think that we shouldn't forget about the importance of history in terms of the tri-community and the role that Saugatuck plays in that. But yes. I think that's really an advantage that we have, and I would call it, as I hear not only residents talk about why they love living here, but also why visitors love visiting here, is, they get to experience it all. It's a differentiating factor in terms of other towns that they visit, at least in the general area. There's just a quality that imbues because of that. I was out walking this morning and I was talking to two women with strollers, and they're visiting for a couple of weeks, their families, and renting a place. And they were telling me about, they love the fact that, they can actually stay in a place on the hill that's part of a neighborhood that offers them that characteristic. But at the same time, they can walk downtown, they can walk home. And downtown has a different kind of feel to it between the shops and the restaurants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, yes.
I think we need to be cognizant, and on your point, the number of people that I see walk past our house on the corner of Grand and Main, going one way or the other. Strollers, dogs, jogging, walking, and it is a very relaxed, casual thing that is different than, going from Wally's to the Sandbar.
Right.
I mean, it's and both, anyway, what I also wonder if we should look at the evolution of the housing stock in this town. I came from Oakland County, Michigan, where in the Lakes District particularly, they went from filling in empty spaces around the many lakes. We're doing that now. Empty lots are disappearing quickly. To renovation of existing cottages, to tearing down cottages and building McMansions. And I'm thinking of I thought it was an attractive mid-century modern house on Allegan Street that's been torn down. I talked to somebody who worries, and you've got the building plans, I have no idea what they are, but they're talking about somebody saying, well, gosh, that'll be another McMansion that is put up. So I think if there is a opportunity to look at how do we want this community to look in 10, 20, 30 years, or even 5 years in terms of the housing stock, this is the opportunity for us to do that. And one of the options to do that is perhaps expand the historical district or not. But the opposite side is, hey, if I buy a piece of property, I get to do whatever I want with it. And there's a valid argument for that. And so, but to dramatically change the character of our community, especially as housing values have gone up, is I think something that is ripe and important for the master plan.
I think that if you go back, reread the tri-community plan, it actually calls that out, right? It says promote low density, in fact, discourage the building of McMansions, right? So I think as we get into the community character and start to, both through getting input and through our own networks and sources, we start to understand what the town's asking for. I think that's exactly where we should go.
I guess the word character is kind of like Bobby talking earlier about a nebulous word that can mean 7, 8, 10 different things as we talk about it here, but sure. But I'm just throwing that out there that I see a progression in the community, especially on the hill. Empty lots, lot splits, are being built with houses. There have been 2 tear downs I'm aware of recently, 3. One tear down was just bought and made a vacant lot, but 2 other tear downs are being renovated. And that is the next natural progression towards that I've seen over and over in Oakland County, for example. So that's all.
The more we've been doing this, the Douglas one I like, they have the community profile, chapter 2 is a perfect place to do some of that,
Great, okay,
yeah.
okay, thanks.
I think with that comment too, I think it's important to have a question, that survey about the evolution of housing and housing priorities. So I think scale and type of preferences, so we don't have a housing specific question in the survey now, so I think that's something that we could add in.
Yeah, we have to agree.
David, what I was thinking, you've kind of laid out questions already that's in here. What I thought we might be able to do is kind of go through, talk about the questions that are here first. And then
Yes,
as I know for myself, and I'm assuming others have probably, I've got a number of questions that I would like to suggest that we consider either in lieu of or in addition to. But first, I thought we just kind of go through what's already here, and then we'll open it up for each member to kind of be able to share additional ideas.
Are we going to 6 o'clock? This is about time.
That's probably reasonable.
Just, I wasn't sure what.
I mean, we didn't set it, but I think we should probably try to set
Yeah, I
time
don't
limits
think
each
we
time
should
too.
go on 6.
Yep.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
yeah, and I guess just on that point going forward, because I feel like this won't be the last one, is if we just stay hyper focused on single issues, and because now we're getting to the survey at an hour in, so.
You want to run through them or?
Sure, it was just one by one, just
Yeah, just.
So the first page residency, we talked about this earlier. This is the same style as the waterfront survey as well as the short-term rental. We can also, if you'd like, we can ask for names and addresses or names and streets. That completely up to you. This sort of information, we as long as people are honest and are only answering once and saying where they live, I mean, we can sort this information by the area of the city that they live, so. Based on the downtown, on the hill, northeast side of the river, peninsula, west side of the river, so we can't sort that data based on those responses.
Hey, Dave. I know we're going through, but I'm going to jump in. We do need one question in here to start with. Are you a resident? It says, are you full-time, part-time? No, I guess not a resident. Okay. Oh, I guess full-time or part-time. I got it. Never mind, other citizen.
I do like the potentially mandatory aspect of at least your street. I think that could be really helpful because the Grand Street on the hill is very different from Taylor, going out towards Blue Star. And I think this town really is block by block. And I don't think that that's too much. If we don't agree, if we want to keep it somewhat anonymous, I don't think that that's too much personally identifiable information.
That would actually help if you're asking a question about Park Street, for example. The people who live on Park Street have very strong views, but I'm not sure that it would be useful to know that it's coming from that constituency.
If we're gonna do that, then it's probably need to do some address ranging, right? Because if you look at Spear Street upper and lower, right, they're in completely different zones and there's a completely different
Right. Vibe.
vibe.
Yep.
So, I don't know.
On that question about like the different areas of town, if you looked at the Douglas plan, it was actually on page 140 in their plan. They actually, instead of naming neighborhoods, they took the city map and they colored in the different neighborhoods. So like it would be like down, like, city center adjacent, and then on the map, that would be number 1. You'd have a color. It'd be like yellow, so people can kind of look at it. Because if you ask somebody, do you live on the hill or do you live east of the river?
Right.
It's like, I do live east of the river, but am I considered the hill? So on the map, we could actually have like 4 or 5 different colors. And they say, do you live in area 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5?
That takes care of the Spear Street thing and it also
Mhm.
makes it a little more reasonable than list your street.
Right,
And I think, and then we get away from the,
like that.
on the hill, east of the river, west of the river.
So, and we're basically saying no to the mandatory name and address then, is that what I'm hearing? We never really discussed it, but
You don't see a freaking problem with, requiring somebody to fess up who they are and answering the survey.
My opinion is if it limits input, then I would be against it. And that's why I feel it'll limit input. People will not fill it out possibly.
Why?
Good question. I don't know why. But they might, if we get more input by not requiring it, I'd fail on the side of more input.
If it's not publicly disclosable, then it wouldn't, I don't.
Well, then what are we gonna do with it? What are we gonna do with it, that data?
As I said before, I don't care about somebody's name,
it's the address.
it's the address. And if we can otherwise avoid people duplicating responses for whatever reason.
How's that different than like Douglas, where they said this area, they said I live in this area. Isn't that close enough? Rather than giving an address?
Do I care that much? Either way, no, I don't. If the majority of the body thinks that the Douglas way of doing it is the preferable way, there's a whole lot of this plan nothing to talk about.
Sure, just more data would be better, is my opinion.
I like more data. I think we need to be mindful that there may be some, gaming of the survey, right? We saw it. I know short-term rental was a controversial thing, but we actually had people standing up and saying, I did it 4 times and you never caught me, right? So at a minimum, one thing they did do I thought, well, on short-term rental was they checked like for duplicate IP addresses or something like that, and they whittled out
Still do that.
some of it, right? I think they may have even gotten most of it out, some people said, yeah, well, I just went to another device. You're never gonna get 100%, but if you can knock down, I guess what I'm saying is I'm fine to say it's mandatory that you put in the color zones, it's mandatory you put that in, and it's optional to put your address in.
I'd say optional for anybody who wants to include it. I wouldn't make it I'm not in favor of mandatory.
I mean, you don't have to answer every question in the survey, right?
Right.
So what the benefit for me is there might be somebody that I would see that I would say, that's an interesting perspective. We should follow up with that person. I mean, if Chief Janik submits a thing, now he's probably gonna follow up with this separately anyway, but I would have it available if someone doesn't want to do it. So be it, but.
And I think at the end, you can give the option to give your name and email, if you want us to follow up for a small group session or one-on-one or something like that.
Okay.
And then with we can see if we can have some sort of smart map. I can see if the survey program can allow us to make a
Oh,
map.
click it.
We actually click on a map, or we'd have a map with numbers on it, and then they would just say, I'm in neighborhood 1, 2, 3, 4.
Make it simple.
Yeah.
Don't make it. I mean, because part of the population is older and tech
Yeah.
challenged.
But it sounds like we do want to be a little bit more specific than the 4 areas. that we have.
Because people, when they look at the map, they're like, oh, I know I live here.
Right.
It's so much easier than, okay. So, and I don't want to have like 8 different areas either, like we do on zoning. I think we can kind of keep it to downtown and adjacent. If we want to do like the hill, then we've got the rest of what's east of the river, which is kind of Maple. And then question would be, and Craig brought up a good point, on the west side, do we just want to say west of the river, or do we want to actually identify Park Street and then the rest of the way? So that we can kind of evaluate it. Does it differ?
Yeah, I think Campbell is a different vibe than Park Street. Just like I think
So
Hoffman is different than North Street, and those are still technically part of the hill on our map. So I would rather have more numbers than less. I think that'd be.
Because I actually could see Park Street being like 4 and then the rest of Peninsula West as 5, like the 5th area.
So
Because I do think we'll get different Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's worthwhile day. If you get to 5, 6, 7 areas, if you get much more than that, then it's, I don't know if it's value.
More discreet than not. And we can always ask for addresses and people put them in, they do, and if they don't, they don't.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, like I said, there, especially if at the end, is like, do you want to provide your name, your address, or your email?
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is just we have different uses for different zones, and those are sometimes like just, if you look at Lake Street, there, how that's just, is that R2?
R2.
R2, and that's just a little strip right there, but then you have another strip elsewhere, and that's gonna definitely change how people view some of the questions with, depending on which area they're in and what's allowed within it. So that's why I think we should be,
We may want to have like
More specific.
Number one, so maybe it's 6. Yeah.
Are we against using the zoning map? Are we thinking that's just too many boxes? Because at first, at first I, sort of assumed that we would break it up into, like Douglas has, I think, 6 or 7 areas, on a map, and it's not too many. But it sounds like
They do.
the problem with using the districts is that a district like community residential takes up quite a large area, and like we said, there are so many parts of that that are not alike at all. So, at what point are we going to end up with 40 different areas, or so
Yeah, I don't want.
I guess we could-
To 5 or 6 maximum.
we could bring
think that'd be
back a
fine.
couple of different options.
Yeah.
And frankly, we could
Back a recommendation.
bring back a recommendation, and then
yeah, I think more
take-
than 6 would be too much.
But let's try to keep moving. We got 45
Yep.
minutes. Then we moved on to if you're not a resident, yes, are you a resident of Douglas, Southern Township, outside of Alton? I think that's a good question. On the age thing, do you normally break it down this specific, Dave? I'm not opposed to it. I just was wondering, do we gather anything by having it in, 10-year blocks, or could it be 20-year blocks? I know we want to see a difference between those who are in their 50s to like 65 to 75 maybe. Only because we have an aging population, so it'd be kind of nice to see if the younger people who are like in the 40 and under, which we have a much smaller portion, but this plan will affect them more than many times than the ones that are 75 and above. So I am interested in kind of just seeing, and I'm not opposed to leave it to exactly the way it is, but I just wondered if there was a reason for the 10-year versus like 19 to 39 or 40 to 59 kind of a thing.
So are we going to have someone under 14 filling out the survey?
No, I actually said it, in my opinion, it should be like, are you under 18 or 21 is a starting point, and then you go from there. And I kind of group the 20 and 30-year-olds almost together because they kind of think the same way. And then maybe it's 40 to 50, 50 to 60 or something like that. Especially I'm thinking as we're talking about this being forward-looking 5 and then some parts of it 15 and 20 years. It's that younger generation, which we won't get as many responses, and Douglas didn't, and I'm sure the previous time we didn't. To a lot of the ones who kind of fall under that 50, but still. It'd be interesting to see their responses and if they're different.
More city breakdown, less age breakdown.
Just, we have 3 teen children, we have folks in their early family years, which is 19 to 39. And the empty nesters is 40 to 59, and then 60 and above is getting into more of the retired folks. So kind of 4 general categories.
Now, I guess instead of maybe going through the 25, this is kind of like on part of the demographic part of it before we jump into the priority and values. We want to see more information, questions on like what type of owner are you? Single family home, apartment? Some I've seen that in some of the surveys, so you can kind of have a better understanding. How long have you lived here? So have you lived here for less than 5 years? Have you lived here 5 to 10 years? 20 years or more? I think I'd like to see something like that. Because I agree, you're gonna
I
get different
agree.
viewpoints. There was, I think Douglas Incorporated I don't know, I was surprised how many people answered it, but they asked them if they didn't live here permanently, what's the zip code of their primary? So you can kind of get a feel for where people are coming from that are seasonal. And then they ask about profession, which was very interesting. And like over 160 to 210 people actually put down what their profession was. I don't really know what you gather from that, but unless you just kind of see, are you kind of targeting, the people who live there or those who are moving here?
I do think we could even look at, if we didn't want to get specific professions, just do you work in the community? Or are you employed outside of it? I don't know. I don't know how to more eloquently phrase that, but
And again, it's one of those things where you're just trying to gather data so that when you are starting to analyze it, is there some similarities? Do you have a higher percentage of, I think in our community, it's gonna probably be a lot of white collar, especially the ones who are not
Retired.
right. Yeah, retired but it was interesting. And so those were a couple of the demographic type of ones. But before we kind of move into talking more specific about priorities that I thought was interesting.
Do we, is there value as we kind of drill down into, what type of an owner are you? Are we gonna ask if, is it worth asking if you're a commercial owner of real estate or something along those lines?
Yeah, I saw that. I think it was in Douglas. I saw it on one of the plans I was reviewing from up north. They actually asked that question.
Yeah.
What was your what's your ownership relationship in the city? Are you a commercial or what's your interest in the city? I reside there or I own a real estate there. I run a business there. Kind of
Or
gets
it's a
back
second-
like
or
we
is it
were
a
doing
second
like in
home
the
or
short-term
whatever?
rental where it was. Some of the people who own businesses, but they didn't live in the city of Saugatuck when they were saying that they should be represented like on the task force. It's like, they're gonna check off they're not a resident, but they own a business here, so does that get weighed differently? The other question that they had was for the people who are seasonal, they asked if they plan to, at some point in their lifetime, move here permanently. Because again, I think we have a lot of those who are seasonal ones currently. That their idea is when they retire or down the road, they'd like to live here full time. And just so as we're gathering demographics, I could kind of see incorporating, and again, I think we gotta be careful, because you want the survey to be 50 questions either. But a lot of that could be interesting information when you're putting the demographics together and trying to determine.
We can get savvy with it and see how much we can get out of just one question too,
There is no, in typical surveys, and I haven't studied a bunch of surveys for master plans, I admit that. Typical surveys ask kind of what riff on your thing about occupation, educational level, male, female. How do you identify? Race. If we're going to do a demographic, especially if we're having people who visit town answering the survey, I think those are valid, general type. Yes.
Yeah, I do. I think you can easily have that. You can always have then one of the boxes in all those surveys is prefer not to answer. So they can just skip the question or they can just check.
Right, prefer not to answer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always an option usually provided with such things as anything, age, race, sex. But those are very generic, general, widely done survey demographic questions.
Yeah, to all of your points, I was thinking when I was going through this, that this is not really, this needs to be a 2025 survey. And this reminded me of the 20th century versus the 21st century. So, yes.
And I don't think, and it's almost,
The only question there is, are we gonna, is it just good to know who participated, or are we gonna do something with that data? So those are what, that's some of the reason why I don't, usually, sometimes I don't put that in there, but certainly makes sense.
well, I think the diversity one, if we could somehow incorporate, would be interesting because it is part of the Convention Bureau. It brings in a lot of the revenue. And I think, you know, it'd be interesting to have it as a statistic because we may end up in the characterization, when we're talking about the unique characterization of the city, it may come up and it could even have like a small subchapter, you know, how that kind of fits in. And again, is it just something that it's here or are you doing anything, you know, to appeal? Or, you know, I don't foresee us changing. I think we can all kind of figure out like, do we have a mix of races? I mean, very much 90% plus, you know, kind of in, you know, the whites. I don't know if we really need it, we know it, but if somebody said, hey, should we try to open up and make it, you know, more, you know, accommodate, if that was gonna be a goal or a priority that we wanted to put in the master plan to try to make, you know, something, the town more appealing to, you know, more of a mix, you kind of need to know, it's like, hey, we got 98% one way, how can we, you know, write something that would make us move towards a more diverse? So it doesn't hurt to have the data, because if we have it, then it allows us to have that discussion during the planning process.
It is quick enough to answer. those
And almost, I can almost see like, you know, in the survey, you got the opening, it's almost like it's gonna have questions. So those like 10 or 15 can kind of be separate before you really get into the meat of. And I think most people would accept that because they're very, like you said, it's very fast answers, like boom, boom, boom.
And the federal census is a great example of asking those very types of questions do in a perfect world, direct policy from both our legislature and executive branches of government. So.
But definitely, like the one about how long they've lived here. I would like to see that because I'd like to compare the ones who have been here for 20 or 30 years. Or is it the same or more different than somebody who's been here for less than 5 years?
Well, and I guess that's
I
what,
don't see it.
I think that's important.
and that's what I was getting at with, you know, where's your source of income coming from? Is it coming from here in this community or outside? Because your priorities are gonna be different. You're gonna, if your business interests are this town, then you care about monetizing that. Whereas if you work outside of this community but live here, you're gonna be focused more on different things.
Correct.
More quality of life things potentially.
Absolutely. And is the order that you have them in here, Dave, is that kind of like what like we're envisioning? You were thinking it's not gonna be the order, like we would jump right into the overall city priorities? I go back and forth as to whether that should be that early in a survey, or should you kind of walk them through all the other areas and then ask them about priorities after they've already got their mind thinking about parks and sidewalks and streets? And then kind of hit a priority at the end versus at the beginning. I don't know, thoughts?
My feeling is it's those categories or chapters. They should be grouped in the chapters and they having that open-ended question for infrastructure, an open-ended question for parks, an open-ended issue for economics.
And I found we kind of had these priorities right here in this section, right with the demographics. Then we started walking through living in the city.
As they walk through
Economic
this,
development, mobility, parks. And I was like, maybe it's best to kind of walk them through all that, let them score them, and then have a priority thing
There
at
you
the
go.
end.
yeah.
Because they've now been thinking about all of that.
Oh, I didn't think about the parks. Let me go
Right.
back and change that, or I didn't think.
And they
about
won't go
this.
back.
Right, exactly.
They might be 3 screens.
That's
ago,
right.
you gotta go
That's
back,
right.
back.
Yeah, yeah.
That was.
I always like having open-ended questions though, where you can give an answer that's a little more narrative instead of, if I don't like the way the question was constructed, or I think it's ambiguous, that's me. I mean, I'm a lawyer, I like to write, so, but yes, very helpful to have that.
And then, do you guys I've seen these surveys and they're always more challenging to create, but if you're gonna say like, when we do get the priorities and you've got 8 things listed here, and we say name your top 3, in some surveys, you can actually like click on it and you move it up, and you can actually rank through 8, or just want to check the top 3. I mean, it's more complicated. A lot of times people won't do it. We gotta like start moving things around.
I like having, you know, sorted like that, but it's less user friendly and so close. Maybe it could be used. That's the one reason why I do top 3. But
Do you have to move it around? Can't you just
I guess you can't.
Click
write
1,
numbers.
8, 6, 4, 2, 3. I thought you could.
There is a way of doing that. That's true too. You can just do it by number. Without like moving it up or down, but.
I think there's a couple different ways we can do it, but I know the one you can adjust the numbers, but maybe we can just test it out and see what option works the best. It's usually one.
And I think when you do the top three, then you're just trying to bring all the surveys together. What was the top, most common top three, right?
If we could find a simple way to rank all 8 or 10, would you prefer that each person ranks all?
I think it's more data so that you can actually see.
So-
Because what happens is, we may know what the top three are, but we don't know how close number 4, 5, and 6 were without all that.
Okay.
And can we add an other?
To the overall city priorities and values,
Yep.
add other and then have a like.
think
like
every
in
question
section.
you- Every question
Open
needs
it.
to have a space
Well,
for other comments.
I'm just saying,
or other-
since we're literally going through what's written here, I'm throwing that out, that for both priorities and overall city priorities, add another that somebody could rank as whatever. Just a thought.
I like the, just kind of getting a little down into the weeds here. I like the, first bullet, vibrant, strong and attractive downtown that maintains small town charm. Again, relating it back to the tri-community plan, right? That small town charm being pretty much a pillar of the entire document, right? So I'd like to see that question or that small town charm tied into some of these other ones, like as an example, we go to year-round residential community, but I look at that and I say, okay, well, we recognize that downtown's important to maintain a small town charm, but maybe not necessarily in the residential community. So I would look for the question to read something like, I don't know, maintain a quality of life consistent with a small town charm or something along those lines, right? Because you're gonna get respondents, right? You're gonna get full-time respondents that are gonna be, relating to that, full-time residents who are gonna relate to that differently than, people who are outside of the community, but maybe on the property here and come up part-time, so.
Well, the other thing is, as you were talking, I was thinking, and this is where I get into the weeds, it's like, so how do you define small town charm? What's that mean to you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is it the same thing that it means to me?
It is
I
a
just don't-
historic
I
charm,
don't-
it's a small town charm. Plus, we gotta be careful how
Well,
you put them into the order that we actually allow them to do the ranking. Because we all know that the survey, the first 2 or 3 that people read are the ones they're most likely to rank number 1, 2, or 3, so it's almost.
That's alphabetical, well, Bobby, what you brought up is really important, right? Because if that's like our overarching goal, right? And I'm going back to the tri-community plan, and I think about this calls it out as well, right? Then we should structure a question before we even get into the city's priorities and values, is tell us what that means, right? And maybe come up with 4 or 5 things, like what is a small town, is a small town, charm important to you? And what does that mean, right? What is it? Maybe it's select the top 3 of these, right? We come up with a few things, right? You could say it could be rural, it could be.
Could be the uniqueness of a small shopping district, it could be the historic, it
Exactly.
could be the walkability of the town.
Those could be,
And again, I think that's why you have.
low
to-
density
You gotta ask
housing,
all those
right?
questions before you get to the priority one, so the minds are already.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Position too.
Looking back to this priority, we have residential growth and development on there. We kind of talked about earlier how we're tapped out in development. So should we be giving them the option to say they want more development? We don't really have the ability to give it. And I also think the year-round residential community, I think if you rate that high, I think you'd rate the other one high. So I think it's found within that in a sense, right? Maybe. I don't know if.
I could see those.
Or we could at least merge those into one somehow, potentially.
One almost feels economic and the other is quality of life, right? It's kind of stuff.
Okay, is that where you're seeing the difference? Yeah, I think if I'm fine with both of them staying.
Uh,
If they're serving,
I think, when I say economic, but you're right, I mean. Again, it depends on how we tear that down, right? Does that mean that residential growth to what Mark was saying earlier is in somebody's mind might be, yeah, I'm gonna come in and tear down a cottage.
Yeah.
Put up a, you know,
potentially, but then it also goes back to, I don't want necessarily if people are coming in and, they're kind of banging the drums for affordable housing, if we don't really have the ability to provide that, then are we wasting space by giving them that option when maybe we could at least get a feasible priority from them?
So that's something, as I read through, I saw some of the aspirational goals were unattainable type things.
Yeah.
World peace.
Yeah.
Yay.
Well, there was an element of people who, when they were talking about the Saginaw Wilds, that they were suggesting that be sold and developed as
Mhm.
residential property. So, and one of the things I hear consistently, that we've all heard consistently, is people who work in town can't afford to live in town. And so people who have businesses in town can't hire people who live in town. Can't hire people because they have to drive a long distance. So I'm not sure what the answer to that is, just like what is the answer to parking short of building a parking structure somewhere? But to foreclose, this should be a thought-provoking, expansive document, I think, and to foreclose those options, maybe we don't have an immediate answer, but maybe somebody does. And so.
I think it falls within the housing part, the chapter that kind of deals with.
Yeah.
Affordable housing, right?
Well, the other thing is to that point, is that we all know that we're losing population for whatever reason. I don't think anyone knows for sure why.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, if we're saying that these are the priorities, this is what creates happiness of people living in Saugatuck. I mean, where's the compatibility or where's the explanation between that and losing population and how you begin to attract people? I mean, this affordable housing issue and the example you just gave has been an issue for as long as I've lived here. And we still don't have a solution to that. And I'm not being critical, I'm just saying we don't. So anyway,
Okay.
just,
So that we can kind of run through, so on the Living in the City, Dave, which is moving on to page 9. So I believe we're continuing like after demographic. I think Bobby's comments, some of the comments we just heard here, maybe a question we put in first is about the small town charm. So they can kind of identify what the small town charm is, and then what's the primary reason for living in the city. Then you can almost like leave small town character as one of the reasons, but at least you've helped them already identify, or at least think about what they can, what they think is small town character. Is there other things? And if you were to move elsewhere, I think it's great, it's like, why would you move?
It was an interesting question. I liked it. It made me,
Yeah.
yeah, I do too.
Are there other ones that fall underneath living in the city that we would think we would want to have besides identifying small town charm? Okay. Moving on to.
Maybe put a pin in that and we can.
Come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to see if we can
It's a
try.
good
to get-
idea, but.
I wanted to
I'm
try
not
to
sure
see
I
if we can get through at least the overall ones, if we've got comments on them, or if there's other things we would like to have in before we adjourn today, so we have something that we can really start to work with for the next meeting. So as we moved into the next one was parks, I think we're all kind of definitely would want to. How were you thinking of this, David? Like just giving them like where you've got that? Do you use that and it's where they would just check off? You'd have columns that would say weekly, monthly, several times a year, and they would just check, right?
But I think, yeah, there's a little checkbox on mine, so that just in table format, and you select one of those
And we,
five options.
Mark made the point to me that maybe we should include Saugatuck Wilds on this also.
Yep.
Obviously, not in the city, of course, but
definitely.
still, a city park.
And then it also, you could always have It's another one that says other, where they could write in other parks. It's not in the city of Summerton. There maybe there's parks again, the tri-community. But now this one about the facility improvements needed. This is again very subjective. You know, it's almost like they can check yes or no. But then I get, oh, you do have then
Hmm.
what? Because it's almost like you have to explain to you somebody what it is that you think needs to be improved. I missed the then and then what the first time I went through. Thoughts on those on the parks?
Seems very straightforward
What's
to
that?
me.
And I didn't want to get too detailed on the park issue, just because there's a parks plan. Assuming there's survey is involved in that as well, so.
And I'm assuming when we, in our chapter that's on our parks, we're gonna make reference to that parks plan.
Then
Then,
a quick question, I'm sorry. Village Square Park, does that include all three elements? The empty space with this little statue and the drinking fountain, the playground and the basketball court, is that all considered Village Square?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
and would we want to just add in just specifically, how often do they use the children's playground? It's been put in, we spent a lot of money on it, just be interested, do they use it weekly? We don't have to get that specific in the park, but I'm just, with that comment asking if it's all incorporated. Those the tennis courts and the playground area are very different, even though they're all part of the same park.
Yeah, that's the fourth one. Tennis court.
Economic development. Yeah, the priority. So again, this would be kind of a column they're envisioning where they would be checking off if it's prior. Yeah.
I just want to go back for a minute to, and I don't have time to do this going forward, but your question, your suggestion, Steve, about how often do you use the city park? If that's the only park that we're going to ask that question for, I don't think it's fair.
Yeah, to bring it into like just specific. of the
I don't want to,
playground.
that's another argument.
That's true, that's true.
So,
Let's leave it out, almost like how we're leaving short-term rental out of it. Just the name of the park and if you're using the park.
Mhm.
Yep. Very good. And I mean, underneath economic development, I mean, I think we've captured a lot of the really good ones. There's probably, if anybody comes up with ones that you would think that we should include. Because again, you know, I can look at Douglas's, I can look at our previous one, I can look at some of the other cities, and they've thrown in some different, you know, some.
That's why I like the other dash lines, because if we, whatever we come up with may not be exhaustive.
Correct.
As I work through these two, I'll make sure that they all begin consistently, like as in focus, support, ensure. So as long as it's going to be phrased similarly.
One thing on, just looking through it again, in the economic development tourism. I didn't see water in here. And I was just thinking, you know, like the waterfront and the beaches to me would be. Boat ramps. I'm guessing it's gonna be like a high priority, so if we can somehow in that group. Incorporate whether it's river, beaches,
Yep.
I
waterfront.
think my head was a little bit in the ecotourism recreation side, but I think it should, you're right, it should be specific to.
Yeah.
Beaches.
I had it on mute, sorry.
river.
Mobility,
And where do we pick up hiking anywhere, like the dunes?
I think that gets into. I saw like bike, oh, you didn't see hiking, though, you're right. We have walking. And then we have bike riding is these in these next set of questions.
Well, I think park use and hiking as it relates to economic development would be the ecotourism, but
Okay.
maybe we could expand ecotourism such as.
Such as.
And recreation such as.
Yes.
It's a good, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I think I know, the city has I know Douglas does, Saugatuck has a temporary transit dock, correct, in Coghlan Park?
Yes. Yeah.
That should be included in here somewhere also. Where you can
Oh, the
bring your
docks.
bring your dinghy and go to dinner and get back in your dinghy
Oh,
and
that's right.
go to your yacht somewhere.
Shopper docks, you mean?
Say
The
what?
shopper dock? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the one
And
right.
down at Coghlan,
Yeah.
that is true.
Well, expand on that a little bit, right, because there were whole, voters that love to visit our, either live on the boat or love to get here if they can get dock space, right, so,
Yeah,
you kind of got to include, if you're gonna include that, you got to kind of include the whole aspect of the availability of marina and transient and full-time dockage around the town, right?
yeah, that might be
Very
that
good.
might be a line item under, yeah, the
Mhm.
economic development, tourism and local
Tourism.
business.
That's good.
Really good.
The loss of charter fishermen.
Mhm.
Well. You go north of here. Go north of Holland and every single port has a municipal harbor, right, where. Transient and you can get full-time slips, right? That's one thing that Saugatuck and Douglas haven't gotten their arms around.
Right, Grand Haven, for example, is a great example.
Yeah, very good. Every single port.
So under the mobility and transportation, we kind of get some stuff about walking. Then as you saw, it goes into kind of biking in general and parking. And on these days, when you haven't listed this way, I mean, I know this is not, it's not formatted yet, so like, why do you walk in the city? Would they just kind of check off as? And they could check off all four of them if they want, right?
I think that would be able to choose all that apply.
Right. That's how I kind of interpreted it, okay.
What was your question? I'm sorry, under
I
what?
just, like,
What I-
we're, like I says, why do you walk in the city? If
Oh,
we're
we're
gonna
still
leave it,
walking, got it.
I was
okay.
like, okay, are you asking them to choose one or can they choose? Basically, it's all that applies.
Gotcha,
They do
okay.
it for exercise, do recreation.
Maybe we should be asked the question, is because of lack of parking.
Yeah.
Well, we do have parking coming up. so-
I know we have it coming up, but
Why do you walk in the city? That would definitely check out everyone.
Yeah.
I can't park in front of my store.
when we were talking, Oval Beach, we just hitting the replay button of all the people that are complaining because they can't go there because they can't park, right? And we ask, do you use it? But we don't ask, is there a reason why you don't use it?
Right.
I think that's really good, actually. I mean, we'll just reinforce what we already know.
We know it, but
I know.
is it important for us to understand how
Modified.
the remaining community feels about that?
Yeah, I mean, why do you walk? I could definitely factor in there. It's like, do we get to how often
Can't
do you, how often do you walk? Would you walk if we had improved sidewalks? Crosswalk, and and that's gonna be different also for downtown, okay? Because, when we get to neighborhoods, that definitely changes, because we don't really have sidewalks and stuff in the neighborhoods. So you are distinguishing that walkability between downtown and neighborhoods. Biking, same.
You just said we don't have sidewalks in the neighborhoods? What?
I'm saying a lot of those neighborhoods don't have sidewalks. Like Park Street doesn't have sidewalks, nothing in the Peninsula West has sidewalks.
Okay.
How many?
This side of the river has sidewalks, so, but
Lucy could
think
use
you're
a
at-
sidewalk. There's some spots and I
Yep.
think in the infrastructure, having some sidewalk discussion wouldn't be horrible to me.
It's a meaningful statistic that people say, I don't walk and I think you need more sidewalks. And then you look at the universe of the people who answer to that way, that's going to tell you if there's certain areas where they, we might benefit from sidewalk, implementing.
Or
or,
you,
you know,
yeah,
building
you're absolutely right.
side-
You can go
sidewalk.
down almost any street and it's rare that a street has sidewalks on both sides.
Right, I was gonna say, it's really on one side, but it really goes quite.
And it goes back and forth even.
Right. Um. After you finish the biking. Then we had that general section, and again, it's just, and these are all semantics, but it's like, does that fit in there, or would it be better to have it? Or kind of like as a concern, like, what are your city, what are your concerns for the city? Do you feel safe? Like,
Sorry, going back to biking and walking. But and just hear me out here, but the one area where we really don't have that infrastructure to support it is Park Street. And is it worth putting Park Street specifically on there?
Because that question, like, are we asking, you know, one street specific and then somebody not asking someplace else?
But I think almost every other street you can find at least a widened shoulder or a sidewalk. And I would be curious to see if we get a lot of responses in that, because then I think that is something that the city could lean on to do something about it.
I think the more general question is a non-motorized path to Oval Beach that would incorporate Park Street and Perryman.
I think that would be fine too, something that,
I think, anyway.
as long as we get specifically on that to at least gauge Oval Beach usage, would you take the chain ferry more if you could walk down the
Absolutely.
road to Oval Beach, or just something that captures it? And I think something about the walking or the biking will do just that.
And would something like that go into like that overall priority of a non-motorized path to parks and beaches? Like in that question where you lay there, or would you actually put it into like a general concern here? Just let Dave kind of figure out.
CJ's got something.
I see the infrastructure chapter having, where do we need sidewalks, and you know, and give them a couple and leave another for places, and what you suggest in Park Street definitely could use.
Yeah.
Non-motorized trail.
Yeah,
And that'll be an important factor into how we split up the map too.
Yeah.
Obviously, like you said, getting those kind of responses from the Park Street residents will be.
and we only have one beach, so we can be specific with that.
I like the idea of just in the park section, just asking questions straight out. Where do we need more non-motorized accessibility? Which parks need more
Just put it right in
access?
there.
Yeah, and then
Parker infrastructure.
everybody's
yeah.
gonna say Oval Beach and.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we just gotta be careful how we say it, because sometimes when you say park, I don't automatically think of Oval Beach. I don't know, I think of it as, but that's my small brain. But if you list the parks, okay, perfect, yeah.
So underneath this park section, the two questions, you can almost have something that relates to accessibility to the park.
Yeah.
There you go.
Then you could have non-motorized sidewalks.
I mean, look what the city of Douglas has done down Center Street, all the way to. all the way to
Exactly.
the beach.
Beach to Bayou.
Beach to Bayou. I mean,
It's the
it's not rocket science. Unless I lived on Park
And I
Street.
mean, to your point, I thought numerous times, the chain ferry would get so much more business if you could actually get off and had a walkway, you could.
Boat nowhere.
And it's, or even if we actually had some commercial businesses over there, which I know no one wants to put them in the neighborhoods, but that would drive somebody, every once in a while, I'm like, going, why wouldn't they just go across the river, have lunch? They just look at town from this, like, if you're at Mount Bald Head, there's nothing over there. We really don't allow for it, but that's a whole other subject. So it's
History Center.
yeah. History Center, I know. But I mean, like, you know, could you put something in that resort
Yeah,
area? I mean,
yeah.
these are all things that just give somebody a reason to go across besides going to the beach.
But even from the chain ferry to the history center is deadly when you're walking, because you have the high wall from
Absolutely.
the beachway, and it's like, oh, if two
If I
cars
was the
come
chain
here.
ferry, I'd be in there constantly saying to us, how do we get more people to want to go across?
I think
It's a terrible walk.
I don't even like
It's
driving.
important to understand that people actually would walk to, because that's always been an open question. Would they walk to the Oval even if they had a pathway, right?
I think
You're
they
still
would.
going up and down all
I
the.
know, but I still think they would. It is like, it's the worst part of it. It's just that whole walking with all the cars
Yeah,
and biking.
And
But
that's
if it's
why,
not a bicycle-
that's why I focus on non-motorized pathway. I think a lot more people would bicycle to Oval Beach
If it was a
if,
pathway.
if it was, off of the traffic lane.
Yeah.
Not only walk but bicycle. So-
stop complaining about parking as much, because it's also, it's kind of tough to tell people, oh, it's, you know, it's, you can walk in for free, but can you?
So I guess we do have a question, like right after the parking questions that were in here, which, I mean, we could have numerous things on parking, but I think we already kind of know where they're gonna be. But that next section that Dave's kind of laid out, the city should invest in on-street bike lane, street improvements. We could have. Yeah, so we're kind of getting to that in that section. Maybe we expand it out. And we be more specific on non-motorized to our parks and recreational areas or something. But we are asking them where we should invest. Then we get into the housing, which is like a whole chapter. So we got a question here, just helping them try to identify the environment. And we jump back in, and this is getting more into the economic, as which is the downtown. Most desirable land uses. The one thing in this downtown section, Dave, that I was curious of, can we have them identify which of these type of businesses they most likely frequent or utilize currently? Because they'll tell us like with the desirability of it, but do they actually, it's desirable to have shopping, but do they actually shop in our shops? It's desirable to have the restaurants, do they actually use the restaurants? So I'm just wondering if there's a way of kind of wording it to where they can like rank the desirability of these items, but then how often, do they use it or would they use it? I don't know, it's just. Yeah,
Is it more of using the existing or how much would they use if they were to come?
if they were to come in,
Just is one, I guess when we have the different uses outlined. So which ones do you want to see, which, and how often would you use them? Or do we ask one more in the current tense of how often do you like the frequency of downtown restaurants, retail, offices?
I know, I'm trying to, maybe it's, or desirability of it is it's like, okay, well, it's desirable, but then it leads to, okay, are you using it?
Yeah.
Do we want more? Do we have a sufficient number now? would you like to see more of those types?
It could say something like, how often would you frequent new restaurants, new or
Yeah, it's more of this trying to get to like the uses as well as do we have a sufficient number? In people's minds, like, do we have enough galleries or do we not have enough galleries? Do we have enough restaurants? Do we not have? Just, these are only my thoughts. I was just gonna throw it out to see if other people.
I like the thought of, do we need more? These are desirable commercial land uses, all of them are pretty much there, but which ones do we need more of?
yeah, that makes sense.
Then the accommodations, kind of the same thing, you're agreeing or disagreeing. We can leave the, the question whether they agree or disagree with the short-term rental caps. I really don't want to have any discussion on it. But at the same time, I don't mind if people want to answer it, if we want to leave it in, but it's not changing. So I don't want to give anybody the opinion that if they answer that they don't like it or whatever. So
Well,
thoughts on
Well,
including that or not
worded is-
included?
The way it's worded is actually very good. I mean, you're asking whether or not they believe the caps have been effective in trying to protect the residential neighborhoods, right? And I think it's maybe a little bit of an argument because it may be too early to tell, but I think you'll get some, interesting thing in there. And I think, Luke's good smile over here. We should probably also thread in either the same question or separate question the whole concept of the regulations that were put on them, right? So maybe have the caps and the regulations been effective in preserving residential character.
The noise ordinances and the good neighbor and noise ordinance, is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
And all that sort of stuff. Just,
I guess the only thing, and I brought this up at the last meeting, is with the caps. Is there's a world where someone who thinks 20% is too high could say, caps on short.
They're going to disagree.
Yeah, but that's a different take from someone who's disagreeing with, I think there should be no caps.
Right.
Now we're getting right down to how the questions were worded in the short.
Yeah.
Task force that were misleading.
Yeah.
Right. Open to interpretation.
Yeah. That's like a tough one.
Because it becomes a question, if you bring it up, it's like, how how many different ways you want to ask it, or you just want to leave it totally out? So,
Well, I think you have to ask it. I
If you do, I mean,
I don't-
I would,
You know what?
Which
I take that back. 'cause I
Which
think-
chapter?
to me, it's too soon, if
Right.
nothing else.
Yeah, let the next revision in 5 years put it in.
Yeah.
and it's just, I just think that we're gonna open up, because then if somebody would say, well, I think it's preserving it, but you know, they didn't, it needs to be a 30%. So that's why they, hey, it's preserving it, but it's hurting tourism, so it should have been,
Plus, it hasn't even been, has it been a year?
no.
There's council policy
Right.
making versus long-term planning.
So it's, if we,
Part of me though is, part of me is thinking that people are gonna wanna be heard, but I guess if they do, there's other venues for that to be heard.
There'll be, there's an open section. Are we gonna
Right.
have?
Yeah, it's,
So,
Yeah.
this thing that we haven't talked about,
I'd be fine with that.
And then that whole thing on the other Dave, like where we said backyard chickens are a little specific. That may should be like over in the housing section as opposed to the accommodation section, but unless you're gonna group a housing and accommodation together, maybe you figure out a way to do that. Because it really relates more to our housing as opposed to our accommodation, because we would never have bed and breakfast with chickens. Because we are right at the 6 o'clock time, I'm just gonna ask, is there other things that you like, didn't like about the city identity, city services, or community outreach? Questions?
No, but I'd like to come back to other, at our next meeting, because I've got a short list of other.
Okay.
I think it are. So there's been a lot of suggestions and comments thrown out as. Are you thinking you're gonna take this and kind of come up with draft two that we can kind of do a further drill down? Cause
Yep, I'll take a shot at draft two, prior to the next meeting, and maybe we could even work it like last time to give the opportunity to email comments to Luke. Maybe we can set a deadline for that, 2 weeks prior, so that we have at least a week to incorporate any additional comments you have. So I'll work on this based on what I heard today, and then
2 weeks prior?
We're meeting in 2 weeks, aren't we?
when's the next meeting?
And that was part of the discussion tonight, is to try and figure out when we want to do our next special
I just
meeting.
realized that we
My-
had those other two topics.
Yeah, so I think in general, we sort of had a tentative idea to have it be the opposite Wednesday to a city council workshops. The next city council workshop isn't till the 9th of July, which would mean we'd be looking at, say, the 16th of July. Our actual meeting is the 17th of July. So I was just gonna suggest maybe we have an hour on the actual meeting.
That's what, I was
Yes.
gonna- what do we have on the agenda so far for July? It's pretty light, isn't it?
We got some revisions coming before you from the sign
Sign.
regulations. I don't know, I believe we're gonna have some zoning district update potentially.
Oh, for downtown,
Um,
right?
and then we might have one site plan review. On top of that, I'm not sure if we have anything else.
So council's workshop is the 9th, so the 16th is the open one.
16th would be would be the next Wednesday, but again, having it on the planning commission meeting, it's scheduled. We all are planning on that one anyway, so that was just going to be my suggestion that we.
If we do that, my recommendation would be. Probably need to punt the sign thing to the next planning commission meeting, because otherwise.
I agree.
we're Never gonna have the amount of time needed to go through this and talk about the.
I think that Fahey Schultz would be comfortable with that also, so.
I mean,
Okay.
No, I would agree, because I know having 2 days of meetings is tough. But the master plan is kind of like it does need its time, and then if you if I put it at the end of our agenda and we go through all the sign and we do the downtown commercial, and then if we've got an application, all of a sudden we're not getting to it till 9 o'clock.
Yeah, so let's move signs to August, and then at the end of the next meeting, we can talk about another special meeting prior to the August meeting.
And when you do the agenda, I know this is always old business, but can we put
I know what you're going to suggest. It's in the bylaws how we,
but we can
because
always
obviously
move
last
it,
week, Mark.
making a motion
I'll
to
make a
move it
motion.
each
Yeah,
time?
I think that I think we could have the bylaws come before you so that we can make sure that applicants aren't waiting for a couple hours while we go through old business. But for now, you know, we can just keep making those motions and not have people sit around. So,
Great. So city council workshops, aren't they the first and third?
Yeah.
So then why is it not the second and 16th?
actually, Sarah might be able to answer that.
Is that because of the 4th of July this month?
July?
No, it's due to the way the first Monday falls, so it's.
Oh, it's the
Focus
first
on
Wednesday
Friday.
after the first Monday?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yes, that.
So they'll be the 9th and the 23rd. So if we're doing July's,
So,
on the 17th, if we decided we wanted to have another special meeting to do just a workshop, we could have it on 30th.
we could have it on the 30th, exactly, yeah.
Well, let's tentatively kind of make that as a discussion. If we had to move things, we could do a workshop on July 30th, same thing at 4 o'clock. And if we need it, we'll actually make a motion for that at our
Yeah.
17th meeting.
Yep.
Everybody agree with that?
Sounds good.
So then it concludes our old business. We had no new business, there's no communication. Board of Officers, public comments. No one in the room. There's only one person online. I don't see a hand up, so we will open and close public comment, commissioner comments.
None for me.
And for anybody,
Thank you, David.
motion to
That's
adjourn.
Really helpful.
Make a motion to adjourn. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
David, would it be beneficial, like if somebody has additional